The series begins with a girl named Annie who is getting ready for work. We see her trying to stretch the blouse she's going to wear because it's tight on her. Then Annie goes to have breakfast, but her breakfast isn't healthy and mostly consists of canned food. Her friend Fran is surprised by Annie's poor eating habits, but is too embarrassed to say anything. On her way to work, Annie passes by a cafe to buy coffee and notices an advertisement for a fitness trainer, so she takes a picture of it. Suddenly, the trainer herself appears beside her and starts commenting on Annie's body. She tells her that her skeletal structure is small and can't support her whole weight. She asks Annie to thank her body for bearing all her weight, gives her number, and tells her that she would be prettier if she lost weight before leaving. Annie remains polite and laughs, even though the trainer's words are silly and upsetting. The trainer's words encourage a customer in the store and even the seller to joke with Annie. They compare her to a comedic actress who is overweight, but Annie doesn't interact much with them and just thanks them with a smile before leaving. At work, Annie discusses the idea of her new article with her colleague Amadi. He reads it and tells her it's good. Suddenly, Anne's boss at work, named Gabe, passes by. Annie tries to joke with him, but he ignores her. Amadi is surprised by Annie's joke, but suggests that she present her article idea to Gabe. He encourages her to talk to him, so she goes to his office. However, his secretary treats her rudely, and we notice that everyone in the office isn't nice to Annie, but she doesn't react to anyone's behavior towards her. Then Annie enters Gabe's office, praises his latest article, and tells him she's happy to be working with him and that she's been reading his articles since she was 14. She then tries to present her article idea to him, but Gabe rejects the article before she even speaks and asks her to go see to her work and pay her bills only. Annie tells him she wants to do something with her life, but Gabe asks her to leave his office. Annie leaves and goes to her desk, where she finds a message from her boyfriend Ryan and is happy about it. She goes to his house and talks to Ryan about their relationship, mentioning that they've been together for 6 months, but Ryan doesn't seem to remember afterward. Annie leaves Ryan to return to work and invites him for dinner, but Ryan refuses, saying he will be working on his podcast. When Annie asks about his job at the electronics store, he tells her that he was fired. Annie jokes with him to lighten the mood, suggesting that he should go kill his boss. However, Ryan takes her seriously and tells her that his boss's wife just had a baby. Annie clarifies that she was just joking with him and then grabs her bag to leave. Suddenly, Ryan hears the voices of his brother Mike and his friend Pete. Annie expresses her desire to meet them, but Ryan refuses, saying he doesn't want to explain his romantic life to them and that he will introduce her to them later. Annie appears to understand, but she is visibly upset. Ryan also asks her to leave through the back door. As Annie tries to exit from the back of the house, she falls and ruins her clothes, leaving her upset. On her way, Annie stops by a pharmacy and requests an emergency contraception pill. That night, when Annie returns home, her friend Fran has a client over. We learn that Fran is a hairstylist and that her clients don't pay her with money, but with other things instead. We see Fran's client giving her clothes in exchange for a haircut. Fran takes a dress from them and gives it to Annie, but Annie tells her that the client stole the clothes as they still have the security tag on them. Suddenly, Annie finds her dog carrying sanitary pads in its mouth. Fran asks if they are Annie's, but Annie says she hasn't had her period for a long time and feels sick and her stomach hurts. The next day, Annie goes back to the pharmacy and takes a pregnancy test, which turns out positive. She confronts the pharmacist, accusing her of giving her a faulty emergency contraception test and that it showed a positive result. Annie insists that she has been taking emergency contraception pills and that it's impossible for her to be pregnant. The pharmacist asks if Annie weighs over 175 pounds and tells her that the emergency contraception pill only works for women who weigh less than 175 pounds. She explains that it's only meant for emergencies and should not be relied upon as a regular form of contraception. Annie is upset and tells her that she took it 7 times from the previous pharmacist, who never told her it wouldn't work for her. At work, Annie sends a message to Ryan, asking to talk. Ryan refuses and only sends her animations in response, not even replying to her in words. Annie goes to talk to her friend Fran. Fran is surprised and asks if Ryan was using contraception. Annie tells her that Ryan didn't like to use it and that she couldn't refuse what he preferred. Fran says that Annie shouldn't have a child with someone who is taking advantage of her. Annie tells her that she was using emergency contraception pills, but they didn't work, which makes Fran even more upset because each pill costs $1.50. Annie says that Ryan loves her and she didn't want him to stop loving her, which is why she did it. Annie asks what she should do, and Fran says she needs to have an abortion and shouldn't have a child with someone who makes her exit through the back door. Annie says it might be her only chance to have children. She cries and says she never thought she could be a mother because of her weight, and that's why she's overly nice to men and never refuses their requests. Fran tells her she's being too hard on herself and needs to get rid of all these thoughts. The first step to changing her life should be breaking up with Ryan, but Annie says she can't do it. Later, Annie visits her mother and asks about her father's condition with cancer. Her mother asks about the diet list she made for her and if she's sticking to it. Annie says the diet makes her hungry all day and is disgusting. Her mother tells her nothing comes for free in life and that she has to struggle a bit. Then Annie goes to her father's room. Their relationship is different from her relationship with her mother. We see her father always trying to make her feel beautiful and perfect, but Annie doesn't believe him. She goes to her old room and looks at her pictures, seeing her parents happy together. She realizes how happy she was as a child and that her life was beautiful when she was younger. So she makes an appointment with the doctor and goes with Fran to have the abortion procedure. 2 days later, Annie wears the dress that Fran's client had brought for her. Fran tells her it looks beautiful on her and asks what's happening. Annie says that when she went to her parents' house and saw her childhood pictures, she realized her life was beautiful. She was an overweight but happy child with dreams. She admits that she put herself in all these situations and feels strong now. She wants to go out and live her life, and Fran encourages her. The first thing Annie does is go to Ryan's house, where he is recording his podcast at the time. She introduces herself to Mike and Pete. Annie then talks to Ryan and tells him she's pregnant. Ryan gets scared and curses, but when Annie says she had an abortion, he thanks God. This upsets Annie, and she tells him that she wanted to have a child with him. She imagined that he would take her to a restaurant and treat her like a human being. Annie says she has woken up from all her illusions and tells him she used to let people comment on her body. She has decided to change. Ryan tells her that her decision is right and admits he wouldn't have known how to deal with another child. Annie realizes she knows nothing about Ryan and tells him she wants to break up as they know nothing about each other's lives. The next thing Annie does is go to her work. She finds her boss, Gabe, standing with a journalist named Andy. She interrupts their conversation and says she wants to write an article about emergency contraception pills and how they don't work for women who are overweight. Gabe refuses, but this time Andy doesn't stay silent. He tells Gabe that Annie writes better than him and that he allowed Andy to write 2 ridiculous articles. However, Gabe still refuses. Andy mentions that a journalist resigned last week and they need someone to replace her to review food in restaurants. Gabe allows Annie to take the position. She is very happy, hugs him, but Gabe pushes her away, so she hugs Andy instead and apologizes. Her colleague Amadi is happy for her. After work, Annie leaves happily but encounters the fitness trainer, who asks why she hasn't called. Annie tells her she's fine and thanks her. The trainer keeps talking about Annie's body and asks her to call her. As soon as the trainer leaves, Annie curses her. However, the trainer comes back, hearing Annie's insult, and starts insulting and body-shaming Annie. Annie isn't bothered and continues on her way, happy. The next day, Annie goes to the place she's supposed to review the food. She's very excited and talks enthusiastically with the restaurant owner, telling him she's a journalist. However, instead of reviewing the food and writing about it, Annie talks to the strippers at the place. She is fascinated by them and writes her article about them. When she returns home, she finds Fran preparing a party for her to celebrate writing her first article. Annie is very happy. Suddenly, they see someone standing behind the door without knocking. They get scared, and Fran takes pepper spray from her bag and sprays it, but it turns out to be Ryan. He wants to talk to Annie, so Fran leaves them alone. Ryan tells Annie that he was scared when she left and that he is attracted to her. Annie says she's also attracted to him but couldn't tell him about the abortion, and that's why they are not suitable for each other. Ryan asks her out on a romantic date and promises to fix everything, so Annie agrees. After that, the party starts, and Annie really enjoys it, dancing happily. At night, she goes to write her article. The next day, she presents it to her colleague, Amadi, who really likes it. However, Gabe appears and is annoyed by her article. He tells her that it wasn't her assignment and that she didn't review the food in the restaurant. He is upset with her and leaves. Amadi believes this means Annie has achieved something significant because Gabe had ignored her completely for 2 years. After work, Annie goes to exercise with her mother. They talk and are happy, but suddenly her mother says she feels better when exercising and asks Annie to add exercise to her daily routine and stick to it. This upsets Annie, who tells her mother that they were having a good conversation and her comment bothered her. Annie's mother ignores her. At night, Annie goes to her date with Ryan. She is happy and well-dressed, but Ryan doesn't pay much attention to his appearance. Annie ignores this, and they both talk about each other's lives and are happy. Suddenly, Annie sees Mike and Pete at the restaurant and realizes that Ryan invited them. They join them at the same table, and the three start talking about their podcast. When Annie tries to speak, no one listens to her. They swear and argue among themselves, then leave Ryan and go away. Annie feels embarrassed by the scene in the restaurant as everyone watches them. Ryan suggests they continue their evening evening at his house, so Annie agrees and goes with him. However, they discover that Mike and Pete have locked the door, preventing him from entering. Annie blames Ryan for inviting them to the restaurant, but Ryan says he thought she wanted to meet his friends. Annie ignores the issue and suggests they enter through the back door. When Ryan is surprised, she reminds him that he always asked her to leave that way. Ryan tries to climb the back fence but falls, and Annie watches him and smiles. At home, Annie refuses to do anything with him and tells him that from now on, he will follow her rules. The next day, Annie wakes up to a sound in the kitchen and finds Ryan's mother there. They meet, and Annie is uncomfortable because she is not fully dressed and because Ryan's mother is too forward and touches her body. However, she's pleased to find Ryan's mother is nice and that Ryan has told her about Annie. She's upset when Ryan's mother asks about the child she aborted and suggests they hold a funeral for it. After that, Annie returns home and tells Fran everything that happened. She thinks Ryan's mother is nice, but Fran has a different opinion. When Annie goes to her room, she discovers that her article has been published. She is very happy and tells Fran, and they both celebrate together. Afterward, Annie and Fran sit in front of the house waiting for Fran's brother Lamar. Annie tells Fran that Lamar is her favorite person in Fran's family. Suddenly, Lamar's car arrives, and both Fran and Annie are delighted to see him. They go to hug him. At home, Lamar takes out gifts from his bag. He shows particular interest in Annie's gift, presenting her with a box of turtle-shaped chocolates, nicely wrapped. Annie is very pleased with it. When Fran is surprised by the gift, Annie and Lamar recount the story of the turtle that Lamar accidentally killed while they were throwing stones in the lake. Lamar insists that the stones hit the turtle's shell, not the turtle itself. Fran, more surprised, asks about her own gift. Lamar, less interested in Fran's gift, brings it in a bag. Suddenly, Annie receives a notification for a comment on her article. The comment is insulting, upsetting Annie. Fran tells her that nobody should insult her except herself. At work, Annie's name is on the board for the most viewed articles of the week. She is in the first position, with her boss in the second. When Annie opens her laptop, she finds an invitation to a pool party. Suddenly, Gabe enters and announces he's throwing a party, asking everyone to bring their partners. Later, Annie has lunch with her colleagues. Each of them talks about who they will bring to the party. Amadi says he will bring his girlfriend. Annie mentions she will bring Ryan, but the boss's secretary doesn't believe her. Annie tells her about Ryan, saying he loves her and she's happy with him. The secretary says she will bring her 18-year-old neighbor. At work, Annie calls Ryan and tells him about her boss's party, asking him to come. She says it will be their second romantic date. After work, Annie, Fran, and Lamar go to have dinner at Annie's parents'. During the meal, Annie's mother teases her about not having a boyfriend, but Annie tells her about Ryan. Her mother expresses doubt, reminding her of a boy she liked in school who always talked to her about other girls he was dating, making everyone laugh at her. Annie's father interrupts, saying he genuinely loved Annie. Her mother continues, saying she doesn't want Annie to be in unreciprocated relationships. Annie assures her that Ryan truly loves her and will accompany her to the work party. On Friday, Annie goes to the party and looks for Ryan, but can't find him. She sends him a message and goes to talk to Gabe. She tells him about the person insulting her in the comments. Gabe says that's a good thing, but Annie asks him to close the comments. Gabe explains that they rely on the number of clicks, and closing the comments would mean shutting down the journal. After that, Annie continues sending messages to Ryan, but he doesn't respond. When Amadi asks her about him, she tells him she's upset. The boss's secretary interrupts them, asking if they were talking about Annie's fake boyfriend. She introduces them to her neighbor, claiming he's her real boyfriend, and tells Annie it's okay to have a fake boyfriend. Amadi's girlfriend joins in the conversation, saying she lied to Amadi when they first met, telling him she was in a relationship. They all joke and laugh, but Annie is upset. She tells them Ryan isn't a fake boyfriend and leaves. Amadi's girlfriend follows Annie and asks if she's okay. Annie is sad and says that Ryan didn't even show up, and she wanted him to be a part of her life. Amadi's girlfriend tells her she shouldn't put her life on hold for one person and suggests meeting other men and leaving Ryan because he's the one losing out. Annie gets motivated and decides not to call or message Ryan again or go to his house. Later, we see Annie outside Ryan's house. She learns from Pete that Ryan is at a pencil fighting competition and goes there with Pete. The competition involves breaking the opponent's pencil, and Annie sees Ryan playing with a girl. When Ryan wins, he lifts the girl up and claims her as his prize. Suddenly, Ryan sees Annie. She asks if he saw her messages and tells him that her boss's party was that day. She blames him for not attending and embarrassing her. The pencil fight girl interrupts, saying she has to leave, kisses, and hugs Ryan. Annie, upset, asks if Ryan is involved with her. Ryan admits he is indeed dating her and that he never said he was exclusively with Annie. Annie is hurt and asks him not to talk to her again before leaving. When Annie returns home, she finds Lamar and Fran making spaghetti. They invite her to eat with them, but Annie is sad and says she'll go to her room and can't talk. The next day, Annie is at a restaurant with Lamar and Fran. She receives a message from Ryan saying he got the date of the party wrong and wants to talk to her. Annie tells them about the messages and says she wants to go talk to Ryan. Fran reminds her that it's not just about him missing the party, but also that he was introducing her to other women. Annie insists she wants a real conversation with him and leaves. However, Annie becomes anxious and embarrassed while trying to cross the street. Suddenly, a confident woman effortlessly crosses without apologizing or being nervous. Annie is impressed and follows her, seeing the woman buying flowers for herself. Annie then receives another message from Ryan but decides not to go to him. When Annie returns home with flowers, Lamar asks if they're from Ryan. Annie says she didn't meet him and that she bought the flowers for herself while out for a walk. Annie then asks Lamar about his flight time. He tells her that his flight is at 8 o'clock and that he won't leave without giving her a gift. He plays a song he wrote for her. Annie says she always loved that song. Lamar tells her he knows and that's why he played it, revealing he wrote it for her. He asks if she knew he had a crush on her. Surprised, Annie says Fran never told her. Lamar confesses he still loves her and Annie kisses him. That night, Annie gets up from beside Lamar and opens the refrigerator. She eats some of the spaghetti he made and is very happy. We then go back to Annie's past, seeing her as a teenager. Her mother asks her to join her at the swimming pool, but Annie refuses, saying she's reading. Back in the present, Annie wakes up the next day to find Lamar not beside her. He has left a note saying he fed the dog before leaving. When she goes downstairs, she finds Fran in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Annie discovers that Lamar told Fran what happened between them. Annie apologizes to Fran and asks if she's upset. Fran says they'll still be siblings and is happy about it. She tells Annie she's the first person Lamar has ever been with. Fran then asks Annie how she feels about what happened. Annie says she feels guilty because she was upset with Ryan for cheating and now she did the same thing. Fran doesn't believe Annie's words about Ryan and asks her not to talk about him again or bring him to their house. Annie arrives at work to find Gabe holding a meeting. He tells them they will be writing 1,000 summer stories and requests everyone to put in extra effort. He announces that they will engage in monthly group exercise activities, and he plans to sell the vending machines in the office. This decision is influenced by his article on the obesity epidemic. He also informs them that the first activity will be on Saturday. After the meeting, Annie talks to Gabe about the pool party. She wants to write an article about plus-sized women and how they can feel comfortable with their bodies. However, Gabe rejects the idea, saying it won't generate views. Annie complains to Amadi, who reminds her that she has access to the journal's website and can write whatever she wants. Annie is concerned that Gabe will be upset, but Amadi reassures her, saying if the article is good, Gabe won't mind. Annie gets excited and decides to attend the party, hoping to find something interesting to write about. Later, Annie leaves work with the boss's secretary. Suddenly, Ryan appears and calls out to her. The secretary mocks him, but Annie tells her she'll see her later and walks away without paying attention to Ryan. Ryan follows her, asking if she's still upset with him. Annie reveals she was with someone else, which upsets Ryan. He calls it disgusting, but Annie points out that's exactly what he did with the pencil fight girl. Surprised at his reaction, she tells him she doesn't see herself as suitable to be his girlfriend and asks him not to try contacting her again. The next day, Annie goes to the pool party with Fran. Fran wears a swimsuit, but Annie is fully clothed. Fran finds this odd, but Annie explains she's there as a journalist and can't wear swimwear. She also has to leave for the group activity Gabe organized. Upon entering, they are amazed by the number of women comfortable with their bodies. They talk to the organizer, who says she's been holding the party for 3 years and the number of participating women is growing. Annie then wanders around the party feeling happy. She talks to a woman about the struggle to find suitable clothing for their bodies, which is both simple and elegant at the same time. Then Annie goes with the woman to dance, but initially feels shy. However, after a while, she gets into the groove and dances wholeheartedly. After finishing dancing, Annie removes her clothes to reveal a swimsuit underneath and jumps into the swimming pool. She is extremely happy, swimming freely. After getting out of the pool, Annie realizes she's 2 hours late for Gabe's group activity. She quickly dresses and rushes to join it. There, she meets Amadi and tells him she was at the pool party, describing it as the best day of her life. Gabe shows up, and Annie apologizes for being late. Gabe remarks that lazy minds are in lazy bodies, which upsets Annie. She tells him she takes her job seriously. Gabe insists she should focus on her health to work well and encourages her her to try harder to succeed. This further upsets Annie. Annie tells Fran and the pool party hostess about what happened. She shares that her boss implied she needs to lose weight to succeed in her job, feeling upset because he always writes about the obesity epidemic. She feels like he is targeting her. Annie is also troubled that at the party, she couldn't believe there are women who love and accept their bodies. She tells them she has always been seen as the fat and lazy one who needs to fit a certain mold. She shares her lifelong struggle with weight, starting from 4th grade, becoming emotional. Annie recounts how her mother made her special food different from everyone else's and urged her to lose weight so she wouldn't have children like her. Angry, Annie says she wasted so much time, money, and energy trying to lose weight with no success. The hostess wishes someone had told her these things when she was younger. Annie agrees, saying it would have saved her a lot of time and pain. She thanks the hostess, expressing how much she enjoyed the day, calling it the best in her life. Annie then goes to write her article titled, "Hello, I'm Fat," and publishes it on the journal's website without Gabe's approval. We see a flashback of a younger Annie sneaking out past her sleeping mother to swim in the pool at night after everyone else has left. She is visibly happy. The next day, Gabe receives a message from Andy containing Annie's article. Andy asks if Gabe had approved it, which irritates Gabe. Meanwhile, Annie wakes up and checks the comments on her article. She is surprised to find many positive responses. Amadi messages her, informing her that her article has received 19,000 views. Annie's conversation with Amadi is interrupted by a call from her mother. Annie shares the news about her article with her parents, who congratulate her. Her mother also shares the good news that her father is responding well to the treatment, which makes Annie very happy and emotional. Annie then finds Fran getting ready to leave for a video shoot. Fran needs to style a model's hair for a magazine shoot. Suddenly, Annie receives a message from Gabe asking her to come to work early. At the same time, Fran drops her bag and their dog eats some pills that fall on the floor. Annie tries to make the dog vomit the pills, while Fran calls the veterinarian. The vet assures them there's no danger, but someone needs to watch the dog all day in case of complications. Fran and Annie argue over who should stay with the dog, as they both need to go to work. Annie tells Fran she will handle it and sends a message to Ryan. Shortly after, Annie is ready for work and Ryan arrives. She apologizes to him for their previous argument and explains she didn't know who else to call. Ryan says he doesn't want to talk about their issues and that the dog is his priority now. Annie thanks him and leaves. When Annie arrives at work, she encounters the boss's secretary, who advises her to run away. She finds Gabe sitting at her desk. Annie tries to joke with him, but Gabe yells at her for publishing without his permission and for portraying him negatively in the article. When Amadi tries to intervene and calm the situation, Gabe gets annoyed with him too. Gabe tells Annie that she has lost her publishing rights and all the articles she was going to write. After Gabe leaves, Annie talks to Amadi, who tries to comfort her. He tells her that her article is still getting views and invites her to a miniature horse racing event. Annie is delighted and tells him she loves such things. Annie receives a notification from the person who always insults her in the comments of her articles. This time, the person knows about her father's cancer, which surprises Annie. Amadi tells her they need to find out who this person is. Annie agrees, noting that no one in her life would say things like that. Annie then notices a colleague in the office eavesdropping on their conversation. She scolds him and tells him to focus on his computer, remarking to Amadi that she is changing. Meanwhile, Ryan is spending time with the dog, enjoying himself. He draws, tells stories to the dog, and they dance together. Later, Annie and Amadi go to the IT department and inform the IT staff about the person insulting Annie. They express their desire to know the individual's true identity. The IT employee says she can do it, but it will take time and should have results by the next day. Amadi confirms the mini horse racing event with Annie, and the IT employee shows interest in joining them, but they don't invite her, leaving her disappointed. After work, Annie visits her father, bringing food from his favorite restaurant to celebrate his improvement and response to treatment. Her father is delighted with the food, although Annie's mother usually feeds him healthy food only. He tells Annie she is an angel in the form of his daughter. They talk about sandwiches and how they aren't always available, but Annie says she went and bought them as soon as she saw the ad. They take the food to the balcony and enjoy it immensely. Annie's father tells her he read her article and didn't realize she felt that way all along. He says his heart broke reading it. Annie apologizes, but her father tells her not to and says he always knew she was strong, and now everyone else will know too. Annie confesses she wouldn't have written it if she hadn't been upset, and her father comments that people often say beautiful things when they are upset. Her father then asks her to celebrate by playing her flute, but Annie refuses, saying she doesn't remember how to play it anymore. That night, Fran returns home and finds Ryan sitting with the dog. She is annoyed and tells him she will take care of the dog and that he can leave. However, Ryan asks to stay until Annie comes back. Fran refuses, citing a rule that Ryan is not allowed in the house. Ryan feels this is because knows it's him, Ryan. Fran explains that Ryan shouldn't be in any place where Annie is. She expresses that Annie is a beautiful person, considers her like family, and was always upset when Annie came back distressed because of Ryan. Fran says this was frequent because Ryan often treated her badly. She tells him that Annie is not just any girl. She is the girl written about in the article. Ryan doesn't understand what she is talking about, which frustrates Fran further. She tells him he is worse than he should be, but eventually agrees to let him stay until Annie returns. Meanwhile, Annie plays her instrument at her parents' house, but she has indeed forgotten how to play, and the music is discordant. Her father laughs and tells her she is terrible at it. Suddenly, Annie's mother enters, pleased to see Annie, and asks if she will have dinner with them. Annie informs her that they have already eaten. Her mother notices the restaurant food and becomes upset, scolding Annie for feeding her father such food. She says just because his test results are good doesn't mean he can eat such things. Annie then confronts her mother, demanding she stop controlling everything they eat. Her mother reveals she read Annie's article and knows she's portrayed as the bad mother who forced her daughter to eat healthily and exercise. She blames Annie for writing this publicly without talking to her first. Annie responds that she didn't talk to her because she knew her mother cared more about people's opinions than her health. She accuses her mother of enjoying the caregiver role, even with her sick father, and says she suffocates both her and her father. Suddenly, her father shouts at Annie, asking her not to continue in this manner. He says her mother did everything for their sake and cares and works hard for the family. When Annie tries to argue further, her father slams the piano, silencing her, and then leaves the room with her mother. Returning home upset, Annie reassures herself about the dog's well-being. Suddenly, Ryan emerges from the kitchen with a cheese sandwich he prepared for her, knowing she had a tough day at work. Annie hugs Ryan and starts crying. Then they sit on the couch, and Ryan checks on her. Annie says she had a terrible day and thanks him for taking care of her dog. Ryan expresses his desire to be her boyfriend, but admits he always messes it up, discouraging him from trying. Annie also wants to be his girlfriend, but doesn't want to be a burden. Ryan reassures her that he likes it that way and just needs her help. They agree to work together as a team to make their relationship successful. Annie and Ryan continue talking, and she forgets her plans with Amadi to go to the horse race. Despite Amadi's messages asking if she'll come, she doesn't respond. The next morning, Annie wakes up to Ryan, who has read her article and is impressed, calling her smart and a real writer. Surprised, Annie finds his wake-up call sweet. Ryan says it's part of being her partner and they should support each other. He asks if she listens to his podcast, and she admits she always has. Ryan then finds another article and tells Annie that the writer seems very upset. He asks if it's normal to start articles with "Hello." Annie realizes that her boss, Gab, has written a counter-article titled "Hello, I'm Healthy," attacking her and people with excess weight. Upset, Annie quickly gets ready for work, saying Gab is her boss and a nightmare in her life. Annie sees numerous messages from Amadi and thinks he's reacting to Gab's article. Ryan tries to calm her and asks if they'll meet again that evening. Annie agrees. Downstairs, Annie looks for her car keys but can't find them. She sees Fran in the living room, who heard Ryan's voice and criticizes Annie for getting back with him. Annie defends Ryan, saying at least he tries. Fran insists Ryan treats her poorly, but Annie retorts that Fran is just like Ryan in female form and tells her not to speak ill of him. Annie, frustrated and late for work, still can't find her keys. Ryan appears and offers to drive Annie to work. Fran mocks him for having a bike, but Ryan says he has his mom's car. Annie goes with him, apologizing to Fran, who doesn't accept her apology. On the way, Ryan is happy to drive Annie to work. She asks if he'll work after dropping her off, but he plans to return home and sleep. At work, Annie is upset and unable to speak. She talks to Amadi and asks if he read Gab's article. She's bothered by it and notices Amadi doesn't want to look at her. She asks what's wrong, and Amadi says he was worried she might be dead or hurt since she didn't reply to his messages. He reminds her about their missed horse race date. Annie feels bad for forgetting and explains she had a fight with her parents and was with Ryan. Amadi forgives her, mentioning she missed a great show, and tells her about the miniature horses. Their conversation is interrupted by the communications officer, who has found the identity of the person writing negative comments to Annie. The officer reads all the comments to Annie, which don't make sense to Amadi. Suddenly, they hear Gab laughing with the secretary. Annie confronts Gab, who says his response was well considered and she's overly sensitive. Annie argues argues that his article offended many people. Gab believes people with excess weight need to hear such things for their health. Annie views it as bullying and questions Gab's lack of empathy. Gab coldly replies that overweight people are responsible for their condition and can change it. Annie, upset, calls Gab cowardly and ignorant. She accuses him of being jealous of her more popular article and resigns. Gab offers her a chance to reconsider, but Annie insists on quitting. Annie asks Amadi to help her find the person behind the negative comments since she doesn't have a car. In the car, Annie tells Amadi she's happy about quitting and feels free. They're interrupted by a message from the communications officer with the address of the commenter. Amadi asks what Annie will do when she finds the person. Annie replies she'll confront them. Suddenly, Amadi needs to use the restroom, so Annie takes him to her parents' house. She's surprised to find her mom sitting on the floor, eating unhealthy snacks. After introducing Amadi, he goes to the bathroom. Annie sits with her mom and asks if she's okay. Her mom mentions that her dad left the house and she was taking a break. Annie apologizes for her earlier words and says she should have talked to her first. Her mom reflects that her own mother used to nag her until her last day, and it seems like a family tradition. Annie assures her mom she's not nagging her. Her mom laments her failed attempt to control everything and make them better. Annie suggests her mom should also take care of herself. Amadi comes out of the bathroom, and he and Annie continue their journey. The person harassing Annie is at a cafe, but they don't know who it is. Annie suspects a man with a laptop, but Amadi gets a call and leaves her alone in the cafe. Annie approaches the suspected man, trying to see his laptop. When he asks what she wants, she confronts him about the negative comments. They argue, but he denies understanding her accusations. Embarrassed, Annie realizes she confronted the wrong person and leaves. Outside, Amadi is arguing with his wife, but Annie ignores them. She learns the harasser posted another comment, meaning he changed locations. Amadi suggests looking another time, but Annie refuses. Frustrated, Amadi mentions his family responsibilities and leaves, calling Annie selfish. Annie calls Ryan for a ride, but he says his mom took the car. He offers his friend Pete's mom's car, but she declines, saying her day couldn't get worse. Ryan fails to console her, and she hangs up. Later, Annie receives a new address for the harasser. She finds a luxury car and a large house. Surprised by his wealth, Annie knocks on his door, asking if he's the harasser. He initially lies, but when she confronts him, he apologizes. She demands to know why he targets her. He admits disliking her feminist views and envies her self-confidence despite her weight, hating himself while she does not. He apologizes again. Annie thanks him for apologizing and calms down, but then he starts flirting with her and invites her inside for a drink. Annie gets angry again, insults him, and calls him sick. He insults her back. Annie grabs a flower pot and throws it at his car, breaking the window, and then runs away.